Hello and welcome. At the 21-minute mark of the first quarter, Carlton supporters were at their highest. For Charlie Curnow had kicked his first of the match, and Carlton had kicked their fifth in a frantic and fast start that gave them a 29-point lead. Carlton fans thought for such a bad Lions start, a grand final berth was imminent. To retake the lead, it took a simple quarter and a bit for the Lions to turn things round, and from there, they didn't look back. And the realisation of a Carlton dream was put to a grinding halt. The phrase of the week is getting a taste of your own medicine. Because funnily enough, what Carlton used to take the lead is the exact system that got Carlton crawling to halftime, crawling to three-quarter time, and out of reach to reconquer an advantage on the scoreboard. So today we take a look at that, comparing the first quarter to the second, where the Lions turnaround set the perfect foundation to keep the run going, and ultimately cut Carlton's run to the grand final agonisingly short as the Blues now look ahead to season 2024. Brisbane's first quarter consisted of forward 50 entries that were few and far between, with longer passing or even dump kicking into the 50 and around the ground, not giving them a sniff on the scoring front. A very early first quarter example shows this, as a short pass was on to Hipwood, or even a handball to Zorko despite the fact he was telling Berry to move it on. But Berry is looking for a pass that's never there, and he takes too long. Their only centre clearance of the quarter was high and shallow. By the time the ball actually reaches a markable height, there's congestion in the marking contest, and there's congestion at ground level, really low percentage. Carlton were exploiting a far less switched on Lions backline to what they were delivering themselves. Only two matchups were ahead of this line, given the ball has numbers loaded to the right. McKenna leaves Cottrell goal side, who, given he's far more reactive to the bounce of the footy, it has McKenna walking in treacle, and the run by Doherty removes his direct matchup entirely. So for that space created early on at the point of the clearance, the 50-50 win had far more damage than it would have if that space wasn't created, and those two matchups with Cottrell and Mackay weren't isolated. This is a similar kind of example where Newman should be shoulder checked in a final, but Zorko is ball watching, and Newman acts to get Carlton a re-entry, where Carlton score their second. The primary reason for the Lions' lack of scoring was for the overuse of the boundary, which simultaneously led to an extreme forward 50 disparity. Carlton's roll-up defending is far better suited when Lions running at the defence are restricted in the options they have, and Carlton can trap them with the assistance of the line. And Carlton's hunt was off the charts, so this didn't bode well for the lack of territory Brisbane got. Now, the vast majority of footballers are right-footers. If you realise the side the game was played on, it's a side where right-footers can swing across to get into the 50, and for a Lions side trying to buy ground, would swing it right into the fifth row, or they'd have to try an inside-out kick if they wanted to go inward and favour their dominant side. Carlton did a good job with making the halfbacks' lives hell in the first. This inside-out kick lacks power, which fuels a re-entry and for many Blues to be open. The Lions have Kitty Coleman to thank, because if he doesn't roll up, those Blues are accessible via a kick for the time Hewitt would have. And so that inside 50 counts for naught. Something the Lions were good at forcing, despite all their ineptitude going forward. Carlton's fourth goal actually comes from this source, because Leicester kicks on his non-dominant left side, completely botching the kick, and Carlton find an open man in the forward 50 by the end of it. You have all these Brisbane players in a cluster getting sucked in. The simple use of link-up meant that looking at all this personnel in bringing the ball up, the Lions weren't anywhere near it, and equally it allowed for numbers to get open out the back. The few opportunities the Lions did get when finding the corridor, they lacked support. They committed so many numbers to cope with the pressure that it simply promoted these sort of kicks. No Shepherds, no one to help escort the ball, and everyone is running with the direction of Bailey, not towards him. And that's how Marchbank can get this mark. This is another example where there's actually some more fluidity to their play, but the Lions would probably want to come into the corridor. Yet that would take a bit of extra time with numbers committing so heavily in the back half. So they're in a dilemma. Play fast, but to an outnumber, or wait to try to optimize that midfield play. At this time, they probably just want to relieve their back half who has been under siege. They've ultimately kicked to a 3-on-2 where the winger in Akers has contributed to this outnumber. Carlton keeping the lines confined means that a spoil over the line is much easier to execute than the risk that comes with a spot that lessens the angle in front of goal. I think another thing to note is the fact that the Lions didn't seem to have an urge to get the ball in the possession of those most damaging. Like here, where a short pass is on, which gives Coleman great scope to pick out a target. Or here, where Coleman runs boundary side, so that probably corners him immediately, but the hesitancy by McInerney is a bit baffling when they needed a delivery into the forward 50 of value. And so, as we've mentioned, the kick is to the boundary, and obviously if the Blues cram that area due to the slower play, it's going to be pretty difficult for the Lions to manipulate and locate daylight to move as we roll up to the ball carrier. This gives Zorko the conscience to kick it without possessing it, and the Smalls have rolled back, as we've stressed in the past few weeks. That importantly cancels out the threat. I think they also just struggled to really get it to those sort of plays in damaging areas. Like here, where the give to Wilmot is ignored and the over possession means the Blues can force a mistake and get another clearance out of the middle. This all speaks volumes about our pressure, which was off the charts as we've previously stated. Brisbane's kicking efficiency in the early going sat at 38% compared to our 81%, as we had 12 forward half tackles to a certain point in the first quarter. Pretty clear who was in control and who is being pushed around by the other, hence the territory numbers and the overall domination. This embodied a start we absolutely needed, especially away from home. Watching the footage back, this mark by Harris Andrews was the most important moment of the game for me. We had just gotten a centre clearance after being quicker in tracking the trajectory of the ball. Anything could happen if the mark spills, especially given we'd scored 2 quickly moments earlier, and obviously we were up 29 points at this stage. Daisy Pearce pointed out something of value on the broadcast, and here it is in its glory.
You hear all the time, people, you got to play the moments in finals, and this is a test of that for the Lions. You can't force having flow and skip straight ahead to feeling like the game's on your turn. It starts with little moments around the contest. Just build your game moment by moment.
Now, the goal before quarter time was one of those moments, and that foreshadowed that there were greener pastures for the Lions ahead. That dreaded phrase, getting a taste of your own medicine. While there were shades of the first quarter as the second quarter began, obviously benefiting us, slowly the Lions completed the role reversal. The Lions were the aggressors, the Blues having to now absorb that aggression and being worse off for it. One of the big things to note was the change in the Lions' kicking style. Their marks beefed up from the second quarter onwards due to the maintenance of possession. They were at 14 marks at quarter time, they had 28 in the second, and then 37 in the third. Carlton had gone from having led time in possession 43% to 35% in the first quarter to being down 42% to 37% by three-quarter time as the game had progressed. Obviously, if you can be responsible with short kicking, you simultaneously breach the zone and you prevent Carlton from doing shit. Obviously, you can't tackle someone if they've taken a mark. In this example, they work things out organically, they don't give us a sniff, and with Newman coming across as a part of the zone defense, the Lions require proactivity to find the gaps and work it forward that way. McCluggage does so here, and that slight turn favours his right, which helps him to utilise one of those gaps. Bit of a defensive breakdown by the Blues to allow this lane to lead into, especially with all the numbers in the vicinity. A player should be here to not allow any daylight and fill the gap. Hipwood had a first quarter example where he bombed it forward, but in the second quarter, his short passing was more damaging than you may think. This short pass seems innocuous, but he's quickly reacted to seeing a wide open Coleman, and the kick goes into a better position to launch a score as opposed to where Hipwood was standing. Coleman is more than capable of hitting up a more difficult pass, and this one is good because it's somewhat on the open side, continuing that switch, but it also maintains a good central spot within the center square and doesn't give up that good positioning that they had. This was a smart choice by Hipwood, given Coleman's positive involvement so far. If you notice how the first goal was built, What partnership was involved? A short pass between Hipwood and Coleman. Handballs are also a good way to achieve the same kind of effect in bringing the ball forward, which the Lions executed well to score their fourth, and we saw shades of that with us in the first quarter. Their second goal of the quarter was a sign of things to come. The Wilmot movement foreshadows what's about to happen 1 second later with Coleman's dash. And the way the Lions are set up, we talked about this the other week, when the key forwards are isolated, you can get it in extremely good positions because of how vacant it is. Whether that is space to run into, kick it from, or mark it from. The kick doesn't need to be perfect by Coleman because you've got a lot of margin for error. The ball can drop short, yet you're promoting the key forwards to come fetch it. Obviously, from a center clearance, there's only going to be one-on-ones ahead of the ball. The height, pace, and precision of the kick means playing back shoulder, like Wiedering is far less effective. Chalk up another for the home side. As we saw from those halfback runs, the Lions were now more reactive, whilst the Blues were stragglers. Being more reactive means more hands to the football, which would happen to equal more clearances and thus more scores. 5 centre clearances to 1 for Carlton in the first had been flipped to 5 centre clearances to 1 for Brisbane. And as it turned out, this goal was on the back of the Lions being more reactive, getting more hands to the ball, getting a clearance, and getting a goal scoring opportunity, which also arose because of their reactivity at ground level. It would have been fruitful had it not been for Akers. I continue to not understand how he keeps managing to get fingernails, or in this case, hair strands to the ball. Those changes in ball movement, pressure, and this reactiveness led to their fifth. Literally all traits that we held in the first and severely lacked in the second due to Brisbane's ascendancy in these areas. You'll note that because of the win at ground level, they can utilise this extra and the numbers must roll over. Obviously, it's difficult to identify in real time as a player, but I'm an amateur and they are professionals. They did superbly to identify the advantage and they got it to a good position as well to score from, as you can see. On our side, the disconnect for that kick inside 50 was just as glaring a problem as it was for the Lions in the first. As much as we've said an open forward line is a good thing, it's not so much when the movement is less dynamic and it congests quickly because your numbers are all up the ground, especially the key forwards who in this instance are both outside the 50 with the footy 60 metres out. Martin takes a mark, but he's got 2 smalls running away from him inside the 50 and then other forwards are trying to flood the 50 with their backs turned. The only kick ever on offer is this one, which Martin thinks about and ignores. So when he's called to play on, the space is the kind we've seen for the McInerney goal, yet because he's got a rush, the kick is poor because Cottrell never indicates any intention or readiness to lead up at the ball. And the Brisbane defender is positioned to pick it off, given he's between the ball and Cottrell and is closer to that space where realistically we should have a lead up target. Because there is no key forward in there to be that presence, it's a wasted chance. I could literally use the McInerney clip from the first quarter for this example. Harry, like the Big O, passes up the option of a better kicker who you'd trust more with it, but isn't obviously demanding it, and the execution of the kick is torrid. Brisbane's pressure was through the roof. Carlton's forward 50 entries wasn't the only bit of ball movement that was compromised. It was suffering around the ground as well, much like what Brisbane had been experiencing in the first. And Brisbane, much like Carlton in the first, had those numbers along the perimeter sitting behind the action. With their reactivity getting hands on it, they were always ready to use this personnel to send it back in for a repeat entry like we had been doing when we had a stranglehold on territory. These problems all culminate. Carlton's first quarter consisted of 22 inside 50s to 11 in their favour. By 3/4 time, Brisbane were up 50-40. If Brisbane turned it over exiting their back 50, the rebound back into the 50 by Carlton wasn't as clear an outcome as it was in the first. In the first quarter, they slowly worked their way up, but Brisbane's pressure lifted and it changed the complexity of the game and limited Carlton's ability to cause damage. This is one example where Coleman wraps up a taller player after the Lions roll up, pinning the Blues down, which is awfully similar to when our system created the same issue for Brisbane only a quarter ago, with some similar tackling involved. Carlton never had an opportunity to capitalise on the forward half pressure they had applied in the first quarter for this difficulty. Carlton would have only one forward 50 tackle in the middle 2 quarters, as opposed to 6 in the first quarter when the Lions had 0 as a byproduct of that inside 50 smashing. To be stripped of so many strengths in their attacking game, unsurprisingly, caused this insane fall off in Carlton's scoring output, as our only goal, sunken deep amongst 10 of Brisbane's, came off of a free kick. All these trends I've mentioned carried over into the third quarter. Carlton had a lack of forward structure, lots of dump kicks in their game. Brisbane, far more reactive. Brisbane's possession game prevailed. Halfway through the quarter, the Blues had 3 uncontested marks to Brisbane's 20. Look, it didn't help that we had a start of quarter brain fade that led to scoreboard damage, when we were probably fresh off a rev up in the rooms. Brisbane fed off this early quarter momentum, kicking a barrage of goals to fuel a 10 consecutive score run, bridging the second and third quarters. Carlton weren't short of opportunities in the third, but were lackluster in conversion. And the Lions got the buffer they needed to close things out despite our valiant final quarter efforts. Overall, the effort was there. The start couldn't have been any better. However, there is no prize for being second best in a final. And unfortunately, we never truly turned that corner that the Lions did after their slow start, which we needed to keep afloat above the surface and have the upper hand in the stages of the game that mattered. And so, Carlton's incredible resurgence came to a conclusion. But it wasn't without many positive moments in the back end of the season, which hopefully is only the beginning of what's to come. Thank you very much for your support this entire season. It's been wonderful to have so many new people on board with what I'm doing. It's been time consuming, it's been difficult to manage and navigate at times, but having an audience to show my work off to is something I don't take for granted, and I'm happy you've enjoyed the content that I've produced. We will see you back here for these next season in 2024, but until then, there is a project for the off-season pending, which I'm excited to show at its completion. That's all from me. Have a good one and enjoy the weekends without anxiety. Let's get busy getting better.